Hello YouTube and welcome to another Python tutorial. So in this video I will show you how to work with SQLite databases using Python. So are you ready? Let's get started. So if you already know, SQLite databases are very famous and lightweight database management system. In the past I've done a lot of video about it. You can check my playlist for SQLite in order to get or to go in deep with it, okay? But here I will show you how to work with it using Python. So SQLite are very used, for example, in Firefox browser or Chrome browser in order to track your downloads or your browsing history. So every browser has actually SQLite database what stores information related to it. But here I will show you just a simple script in order to interact with SQL databases, okay? Actually, I will create a new one and show you how to interact with it. So first thing first, let's create an empty file. Here I created an empty file called SQLite.py. So in order to interact with SQLite databases, we have to import a model called SQLite tree. It's there by default, so you don't have to install it using pip install SQLite tree, for example, because it comes by default with Python, okay? So now that we have actually imported the SQLite model, we must create connection to our database. So I will create an object called con. I'll be using the method for this library called connect, okay? And here I'll provide the name of the SQLite database. So let's create a new one called, for example, students.db. So db is the most common extension for SQLite, but you can use whatever extension you want, it doesn't matter. So now remember, whenever you open a connection you have to close it at the end. So let's go and close it using the close method at the end of our script. Here we go. Next, in order to interact with this student.db database, we have to create a cursor. So let's create an object called cur for cursor, and using the same connection I will create it using the cursor method, okay? So now that we have created a cursor object, we can execute our SQL statement using the SQL statement that we know for most databases, okay? So I'll be using here our cursor and the method execute in order to actually write SQL statement. So in order to create, for example, a table, which is the first object in our database, we'll create SQL statement create database. So I will create a table called, for example, students, and inside a parenthesis I'll put here the different columns. So for example, the first column will be an id, which is integer, not null. And for example, let's create also a name for our students. Let's make it a text. And for the third column, I will here provide subject, which is also a text. And finally, let's make a note, which will be a float number using real data type. So here we have created a table called students, which has actually four columns: id, name, subject, and also note. Pretty easy, pretty simple. So every SQL statement must be terminated by a semicolon, so we can add it if you want. So now that we have created our table, we can insert values into this table. So here I'll using the same method execute, and statements for inserting actually values. It's simple, insert into table name, so it's called students, and keyword values, and inside parentheses I will be actually providing the values. So first row 1, so the name I can make it, for example, Max. Subject, let's, for example, Matt. And for the note, let's make it 12. Okay, but here you have to take attention. This insert statement must be inside actually double quotes, not single quotes, because we have already single quotes here in our statements. So in order to avoid any errors, it's better to put it inside double quotes. And of course at the end we can make our semicolon. So let's add a couple of rows. So let's duplicate this line 3 times, 4 times. Okay, and let's put here some other values, 2, third row and fourth row, and let's also change the names. So Sarah, for example, here let's do John. Here let's put Thomas, for example. Okay, let's keep the math subject and let's just 10 here, change the notes 16 or 15, and here 19. So we hear all our statements. Let's make sure that we don't have any errors actually here. Here we go. I guess everything is okay. So in order to make the changes to our database, we have to commit our changes using the commit methods. Here we go. I guess we are done now. We have created our table. We populate it using these 4 SQL statements. And now let's execute our script in order to see if everything is working good. Okay, so let's save our file. Let's return back to our shell and let's execute our Python tree and the name of my file, which is SQL.py. So I have no error, which is a good sign. So now we have actually inserted these values into our table students. So how can I verify that? You can verify that using any SQLite browser, or you can just install SQLite into your system. So let's do that. I'll install here, for example, SQLite 3 with apt, because here I'm using Ubuntu. Up install, actually I forget install. Here we go. So now it's installing SQLite. So just to browse our database called students.tp, check if we have indeed inserted our values. So now, as you can see, it has finished installing SQLite. So I'll using SQLite 3 command, and here I'll provide the name of the database. So of course here I'm inside the same directory where the file has been created. So I'll just create or provide the name of my database, which is called student.tp. Here we go. So now we are inside it. We can execute our SQL statement. So let's select all from our table name, which is students, and semicolon and end. Here we go. So you can see that indeed I have our 4th rows inside my database. Okay, so I have successfully using the Python create a database called students with the table called student, and inside it we have our 4 rows. Now let's actually use our script in order to print the same result but using SQLite. So I will actually get rid of all these statements here because we don't want to create any table or insert any values. We want just actually to print all this rows. So in order to print it, we'll use the print method, and inside it we'll use actually the cursor dot fetch all method. So cursor dot fetch all method. Here we go. So with this method we can get actually all the rows in our table students. But first of all, let me just create here our SQL statement with the method execute. So let's select all from our table, which is called student, not students. Okay, so here we have executed our query, select all from students, and here we'll print using the fetch all method. So let's see if we get the result needed. I'll return back to my shell and I will try to execute my script. Here I have an error. Select all from students. Object has no attribute. Yes, because I mistyped the execute method. So actually execute I forgot E here, execute method. So sometimes it happens, it's very usual. Here we go. So you can see here I've got a list. So this list contains the 4 values in our table. Okay, students of course. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to work with SQL databases using just this model called SQL tree in Python. So that was just a brief introduction how to interact with SQL databases using Python. As always, I hope it has been informative for you, and I want to thank you for viewing. Bye bye.